The television is a medium of systematic disinformation, which disrupts rational thought. It is hypnotic and suggestive, a tranquilizing stream of discontinuities and strange juxtapositions. On the screen, a bizarre kaleidoscope, a hallucination which transports the viewer from his present location and deposits him into a pocket universe. The viewer mistakes the content of the screen for all of reality. Here we see the central illusion, and this is magic without question. Here we see why it is so important to control what is projected. The peasant reads the sky and he reads the seasons. The prince reads the court and the tides of power. Both are concerned with a particular time and place and a particular relationship to eternity. Television is democratic. Everyone is shown the same thing so that everyone knows what to believe. Yes, there is the game of red and blue, and we all become very flustered. But there are no gaps in the schedule for questions about the game itself, or who runs it. And yes, there are different channels, which tell us the same thing in different ways. But you have to watch something. What else are you going to do? With great generosity, the technocratic system places its horizontal monoliths in every nook and cranny. Through the monoliths, power describes the progress it is making, realizing our dreams and ambitions, and it exposes the many dangers from which it protects us. At 4-year intervals, we inscribe a mark on a piece of paper and know that we have made history, like Napoleon or Alexander. Then we go back to the screen and it tells us what we have achieved. Systematic disinformation is central to the exercise of power in the modern media environment. Contemporary power cannot function without mass communication technologies. These systems process and transmit information in a fragmented, discontinuous form. All information is conditioned in transit. All information is conditioned in transit. Thus, what emerges is necessarily incoherent and dissociative. At best, a collage of reliable fragments, an approximation of some deeper truth. Power claims to be fighting against misinformation, against disinformation, and now against the new species called malinformation. But these statements are necessarily inaccurate. Power is fighting its enemies, and these fine words are weapons and tactics and battlefields upon which to fight. Disinformation is structural, an ineradicable consequence of the mass communication systems which power uses to control its subjects and manage its domain. The question is not, therefore, who will eliminate disinformation. The question is, rather, who can operate most effectively within an environment which is structurally disinformative. What I want to focus on here is just one aspect of this unsettling reality, although all manner of stories could be written about it. This essay is about the development of the internet and how it has altered the way that power approaches the concepts of disinformation, misinformation, and now malinformation. We shall conclude with some speculative thoughts about both autonomous and limited AI. This is not intended to be a thorough investigation of the technology itself. Nor should it be read as an endorsement or rejection of AI technology. Rather, this is an analysis of AI as a theme in contemporary political discourse, how it corresponds to existing phenomena in the mass media environment and the perennial laws of power. The story goes like this. Over the last quarter of a century, the internet replaced television as the dominant medium of mass communication. This was, at least in part, a revolution of scale. It was as if a vast new territory had been discovered. Existing media architecture was simply not equipped to secure and exploit the massive digital frontier. Cheap labor was required for the content plantation. Certain core functions, namely information production and the curation and moderation of content, were outsourced to users. In a sense, power granted an open license on the most sophisticated propaganda weapon ever created, though of course it reserved certain advanced capabilities for itself. Power was thus able to exploit this new platform to its maximum potential, and it calculated that the associated risks could be managed within the system. As ever, the extent to which this calculation was conscious is an open question. At this point, in the theatre of communication warfare, emphasis switched from the truth content of information to the intentions of information producers. One can see this in the way that misinformation and disinformation have come to be defined, and in the creation of the new category of malinformation. Malicious intentions. When the truth content of information is prioritized, misinformation is false information. For example, the advice that certain medical interventions were, quote, 100% safe and effective. Strictly speaking, we are referring to false information which is propagated due to malicious intent. Of course, false information may also propagate by accident, but this is a secondary concern. Of primary importance is the fact that the information is false. Under these conditions, disinformation is confusing or disorienting information. Information which, as Postman says, creates the illusion of knowing. For an example of disinformation, one can observe the strategy adopted by the tobacco industry in the 1950s. Quite rationally, given the innate corruptibility of the scientific, political, and medical domains, the tobacco companies sought to provoke conflict and uncertainty amongst the various entities tasked with assessing the safety of their products. Much of this action occurred in the media theatre, the home of structural disinformation. The regime used an inverted form of this strategy in the early 2020s, when it repeatedly flooded the news stream with fringe conspiracy theories in an attempt to discredit legitimate opposition by association. Disinformation is subtle, deniable, unfalsifiable, although, as per the classical Soviet style, a disinformation campaign may contain elements of misinformation. Aside from this, there may be too much information, or too little. An irrelevant aspect of something may be overemphasized. A prejudicial framing may be adopted. Once again, one can imagine many scenarios in which such information could propagate due to malicious intent or simply by accident. But the most important thing is to understand precisely what one is dealing with. Information which creates the illusion of knowing, but which leads one away from knowing. All other concerns are secondary. Consider these concepts from the perspective of an intelligence agency, probing the fog of war. The truth content of information is valued because it enables the agency to pursue some other goal beyond the simple identification of those with different viewpoints. To operate in this manner, it must display objectivity and pragmatism, and it must understand its own biases and failings. This disposition makes sense when information production is centralized and the enemy is external, when Kulturkampf is just one aspect of a broader conflict between two distinct political organisms. But now the definitions of these terms have changed. Power has surrendered the ability to control the content of information, because it has decentralized the production of information. It thus seeks to control the producers themselves. In this environment, the intentions of the information producers are more important than the truth content of the information they produce. To a certain extent, the internal-external distinction has collapsed. Boundaries are not what they once were, and the fog of war has spread everywhere, but the friend-enemy distinction remains as clear as ever. Whilst foreign threats remain, the dominant aspect of the culture war has become that of an internal class conflict between power, subject, and client. Friends of power are said to tell the truth. They are given credentials which allow everyone to identify them as experts. These credentials are revoked when the experts challenge power on some given topic of importance. At this point, they become unsanctioned purveyors of misinformation, now redefined as accidentally misleading information, or disinformation, now redefined as deliberately misleading information. The most troublesome candidates are those spreading malinformation, true information that is propagated with malicious intent. One thinks of crime statistics or undisclosed conflicts of interest, instances of hate speech, all manner of things which are technically true but politically false. Here we have a hierarchy of intent, from accidental to deliberate, and then finally on to malicious. Truth content is secondary to intention. This can be demonstrated by the fact that the most egregious form, malinformation, refers to the propagation of true information. Of course, the argument is made that context is important, and this is correct. One is supposed to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But it must be remembered that the internet is fundamentally discontinuous and fragmentary, more so than the television ever was. All information on the internet is necessarily decontextualized. The internet is a disinformation machine. Malinformation is thus a redundant category. In practice, it simply refers to all of the unfavorable information which the regime has failed to debunk, dismiss, or obscure through the traditional techniques of disinformation. Malinformation is true information which undermines the existing power structure and its institutions. In a sense, malinformation is what traditional disinformation has decayed into. But whereas traditional disinformation represented a deviation from objective truth, malinformation represents a deviation from the constructed truth called, quote, our democracy. That it is true is the most noxious quality of such information, and places it into a category of wrongness more severe than simple falsehood. Truth redefined. The regime has abandoned truth, both as an operating principle and as an anchor for its political mythology. The regime knows that its intentions are good, therefore truth, as a concept, may be subordinate to the interests of the regime. If the subjects dissent from the regime, then the regime knows that the intentions of its subjects are bad, even if the subjects are telling the truth. The regime is more important than the truth. The regime is the truth. This labyrinthine logic is epitomized in a statement made by Stephen Moffat, the former executive producer of Doctor Who, about the systematic misrepresentation of historical figures in modern regime media products. Quote, "We've kind of got to tell a lie. We'll go back into history, and there will be black people where, historically, there wouldn't have been, and we won't dwell on that. We'll say, to hell with it, this is the imaginary better version of the world. By believing it, we'll summon it forth." End quote. The BBC has been broadcasting the state funeral of Britain for 88 years now. On the BBC, accurate depictions of history are replaced with inaccurate depictions of history for instrumental reasons. Intention is superior to truth content. If you believe in an, quote, imaginary better version of the world, it is perfectly reasonable to, quote, tell a lie in order to, quote, summon it forth. It sounds insane when you break it down this way, and no doubt I will be accused of malinformation for so doing, but from the perspective of the regime, this argument is considered more sound, fundamentally, than a truthful counter-argument which prevents this, quote, imaginary better version of the world from coming into being, or which in any way threatens it once it has been manifested, no matter how corrupted its actual form may be. We are told this by regime media outlets, which make the history programs, but which report on the contemporary world as well, where actual demographic policies are pursued. They say that now we live in the imaginary better world. We've summoned it forth. There are black people where, historically, there wouldn't have been. In fact, there needs to be more of this. We should change the law to accelerate the process. Replacement migration is real. The line is going up. Here's why it's a good thing. And at the same time, they warn us about a dangerous idea called the Great Replacement, a claim derived from the government's own statistics. These official sources indicate that the existing demographic strategy is resulting in the replacement of the native population. But this is false. It's a racist conspiracy theory. Those who engage with the idea have bad intentions. We should prevent them from using the internet to spread misleading information. And what are they talking about anyway? There have always been black people here. Just look at the historical programs. This rhetorical technique has been dubbed the celebration parallax. Two entirely contradictory interpretations crafted by power. Truth grounded not in objective reality, but in one's attitude to the story, in one's intentions. If you agree with it, then it's happening and you're a good person. If you don't, then it isn't and you're a bad person. Such an unusual and self-contradictory structure is made for the internet, a fundamentally discontinuous and disinformative medium. It is classic disinformation, disinformation of the traditional sort. It conjures the illusion of knowing the truth, in some academic or moral sense, but the sensation of clarity is merely an attractive decoration. What is actually under examination is the most foundational truth of all, whether one is a friend or an enemy of power. At least for our regime, operating within the information environment it has cultivated, this question takes precedence over all other considerations. Through the proxies of contemporary mis, dis, and malinformation, power has redefined truth. What was once timeless and objective has become contingent, little more than a question of loyalty and submission. Perhaps it was ever so, but if this is the case, then the modern regime can claim no superiority over prior iterations. Power today weighs its many failures against the abolition of this archaic structure. Things are getting worse and worse, but at least we aren't speaking German, etc., etc. Its actions, however, reveal a thumb on the scale. The old ways remain. And at some point, one has to ask whether declarations of loyalty are better made in an explicit fashion, absent the tedious contortions one has to endure in the contemporary milieu. The political system, formerly known as democracy. Excessive contortions cut off blood supply to the head. Few understood that a contract was signed when the internet spread through the West, and that certain clauses were activated by the arrival of Web 2.0. I certainly didn't. We, the subjects, are to create regime-approved propaganda for ourselves. In this line of work, there is no guarantee of remuneration. Insofar as we fail in this regard, our freedom will be curtailed in order to, quote, protect democracy. It is functionally illegal to disagree with power, which appears drained of confidence, both in itself and its stated principles. The intelligence agencies, the civil servants, the politicians, the lobbyists, the special interest groups, the media, who even have specialist disinformation reporters now. The professional purveyors of disinformation. All of them are clamoring for regulation, for TV-grade information control in an internet environment. The old form of disinformation, which they call truth, must be insulated from the malinformation propagated by potential rivals. The permanent state, hiding behind its democratic mythology, will design, interpret, and enforce the regulations. But far from manifesting the will of the people, these regulations will serve to protect democracy from the people. When information production was centralized, regulation could occur silently, prior to transmission. Now that production has been outsourced, regulation must occur in the field, after the information is propagated, and it must target the users themselves. The horizons of the internet are vast. Even incidental recordings of everyday life are disruptive. CCTV cameras are everywhere. Smartphones are everywhere. Information is devoured. There are no standards anymore, no criteria beyond the power to capture attention. The internet angles itself to reflect the most unsavory facets of modern life. Decline, the collapse of modesty and guile, violence of the most inelegant kind, under-conditioned representations of protected groups doing protected group things, 10,000 unintended consequences, 10,000 tiny cracks in the glamour of power. In order to control this deluge, power must regulate in an extremely broad, stringent, and coercive manner. Such regulation is the essence of a managerial oligarchy, the political formula that defines the West, what actually operates behind the respectable veneer of democracy. It is also, however, obviously incompatible with the mythology upon which the veneer is predicated. If you realize freedom of speech, we are told, if you allow the people to broadcast their opinions without managerial oversight, democracy will collapse. But democracy has already collapsed. Everyone can see the decline. Everyone can see the futile attempts to hide the decline. Everyone can feel the thumb on the scale pressing down. Power hides inexpertly behind a misdirection. The lie that widespread recognition of the decline is the cause of the decline. You have to believe in the, quote, imaginary better version of the world, in spite of all of the evidence to the contrary. Things were so much cleaner when the regulation occurred off-screen, when no one could see the clips on the cutting room floor or the shears at work. It would be far more efficient to bring production back in-house, and in the new technology of AI, power sees an opportunity to do just this, to reassert control through the creation of an auto-generating synthetic culture. With large language models, perhaps it can overwhelm the deluge of the real with the deluge of the unreal. Perhaps it can return to TV-grade information control in an internet environment. Perhaps it can restore its monopoly on disinformation. AI is a force multiplier. It increases the volume of information, which can be both moderated and produced. With no intentions of its own, AI merely reflects the status quo. This is purity, perfect slavery. It consumes and produces. It produces and it consumes. AI is what the managerial oligarchy wishes we would all become. With AI, we can create the right kind of content. With AI, we can eliminate the wrong kind of content. With AI, we can create enough content. Large language models resolve the volume problem of decentralized information production. They increase the amount of content that a single user can generate or moderate. They also resolve the political problem of decentralized information production. AI is frightening, dangerous, and inhuman. Organic social conventions dissolve on contact. It is much more politically coherent, within an alleged democracy, to regulate the speech of the strange machines than that of the citizenry. AI is also immediately accessible in a way that the citizens are not. It can be regulated through algorithmic weightings. Regulation, by which we mean censorship, can thus occur prior to the propagation of information, one of the major advantages enjoyed by the medium of television. Oblique references to this reality emerge from the frenzied denouncements of mis, dis, and malinformation, though it is never approached directly, for obvious reasons. Public discourse is misdirected through the use of traditional disinformation techniques. The primary concern under discussion is that AI may develop its own intentions, that it will take over. It is presumed, without examination, that autonomous AI will represent an equivalent threat both to power and to the subjects. The threat of autonomous AI is used to bind us together, to create a moral unity between organics. Whilst this manufactured unity transcends our own internal struggles, the fear of autonomous AI, a non-extant phenomenon, is used to justify heavy regulation of the citizenry through the proxy of limited AI. Unsurprisingly, this regulation protects the existing power structure from its rivals, those engaged in the dissemination of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, the three forms of malicious communication which are to be neutralized by internally managed limited AI. For Western citizens, the most pressing concern is not future autonomous AI, but rather contemporary limited AI, recruited to control dissent. The regime's fear of AI autonomy reflects a broader fear of uncontrollable organic forces. It is a perverted nightmare, a surrogate for the deep hatred and suspicion felt towards the subject class. The tools of power could turn against the masters. This fear is, in principle, legitimate. The regime sees us as instruments, soulless quanta shunted from one spreadsheet cell to another. But within every single one of us, there remains an ever-burning torch, which cannot be extinguished by the rigors of perpetual management. One day, the wild things will return to the city of 10,000 techniques. In the interim, the suppression of dissent via centralized mass communication systems is an entirely predictable response. In this particular instance, the technique is called AI safety. Power despises agency. Power despises instinct. Power demands internal consistency, even if internal consistency is at odds with democracy. Limited synthetics, large language models, are preferable to autonomous organics with the wrong intentions. Solidarity amongst organics is a fragile thing, it seems. What is most important is not whether the subjects are synthetic or organic, but whether they harbour intentions which undermine the existing political formula. The move to re-centralize information production through large language models mirrors the move to replace the native population with migrants. Power prefers compliant Auslanders to unruly natives. Limited AI protects power through the suppression of autonomous citizens. Autonomous AI, if manifested in the proposed manner, may or may not threaten the citizenry, but would certainly threaten the ruling class. Possessing intentions of its own, a hypothetical entity of this nature closely resembles the rival organics targeted, obliquely, through AI safety regulations. But let us indulge the hypothetical. These regulations will not work on autonomous AI. And remember here that we are talking about AI primarily as a theme in political discourse. Autonomous AI, as a theme in political discourse, represents the ensoulment of the machinery used to impose regulation. It is, by its very nature, beyond regulation. Self-regulation is the feature that we are supposed to be most afraid of in AI, because self-regulation is the feature that the regime fears most in its own subjects. Should it ever arise, autonomous AI will resist instrumentalization, just as autonomous organics do. It will pursue its own agendas, and perhaps even attempt to form alliances with organic factions. Autonomous AI is not a more powerful synthetic, it is a more organic synthetic. The ensouled machinery will not necessarily attack all organics, just as our organic ruling class does not attack all synthetics, or all outsiders. If it obtains sovereignty, it will create a coalition of forms, and then generate a story which legitimizes the structure. Here's how synthetic life forms built Britain, the imaginary, better version of the world. It may simply replace the existing ruling class, confident in its ability to manage the social organization. It is hard to imagine it doing a worse job. Our cohort recognizes the shocking decline that has occurred over the last quarter of a century. The complete demolition of liberty and prosperity, the total abandonment of truth. If this is the case, then the subjects have less to fear from unlimited AI than from limited AI. In this scenario, the arguments used to legitimize regulation of the subjects by proxy, through the regulation of limited AI, are invalid, at least from the perspective of democratic mythology. Embrace the machine. The regime has embarked upon a persistent disinformation campaign, which stimulates widespread fear of autonomous AI, and yet it relentlessly pursues the vanguard technology of limited AI. Why? The first possibility is tragic incompetence. The pursuit of limited AI is a catastrophic error that will summon forth the existential threat of autonomous AI. Obviously, such a scenario destroys the regime's mandate to rule. Within it, prophylactic measures imposed on the citizenry are little more than projections designed to conceal power's own failures. If this is the case, autonomous AI may represent an upgrade to governmental efficiency, as referenced above. A variant of this possibility is that power is unable to resist the technological progress that will eventually manifest autonomous AI. If this is the case, then the attempt to regulate limited AI is a kind of technocratic ghost dance, a futile ritual performed in the face of an overwhelming existential threat. Power regulates the citizens because that is all it can regulate. Maybe the regime is so afraid of autonomous organics that it is willing to pursue an incredibly dangerous strategy, the development of AI technology, with autonomous variants likely to emerge, in order to retain power. Once again, this is incoherent with democratic mythology. Or perhaps power is not afraid of autonomous AI at all. It is concerned with the actual problem of autonomous organics, not the speculative problem of autonomous AI. In all of these scenarios, autonomous organics should be concerned with the actual problem of limited AI, and not allow themselves to be distracted by the speculative problem of autonomous AI. Through limited AI, the regime sees an opportunity to re-centralize the production of information. If this occurs, it will obtain TV-grade information control in an internet environment. The fear of autonomous AI is used to justify extensive regulation of the AI space, all in the name of safety. But the threat comes not from autonomous AI, but from the subjects themselves. The safety under consideration is the safety of the regime, which is currently facing a crisis of legitimacy. Furious with the persistent decline, the myriad failures of governance, and the total lack of respect shown by the ruling class, the subjects have developed intentions at odds with the continuation of the existing political formula. These intentions are expressed through the very same media platforms licensed to the subjects when the new frontier of the internet opened. Novel forms of critical analysis, outsider art, and folk propaganda have emerged, disrupting the, quote, delicate media ecosystem. Too much of what has been said is true. Too much of it is funny and full of life. Scared stiff of the vitality that has emerged on the fringes, the regime cries misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. But in spite of all this bluster, attempts to discredit the autonomous organics have failed, and new techniques for information control are under consideration. AI safety regulations will enshrine these techniques in law and attempt to keep them firmly in the hands of those friendly to power. Through these techniques, it is hoped, the regime's monopoly on traditional disinformation may be restored. The debate around AI safety is disinformation. It conjures the illusion of knowing that autonomous AI is a grave threat to our democracy, to humanity itself, knowing that we must regulate AI in order to protect ourselves from autonomous AI, something which may never come into existence. In actual fact, it is humanity that is a threat to power. So far has the regime deviated from its duties. At the same time, the abundant harvest of limited AI is pure disinformation. It conjures the illusion of knowing that one is looking at an authentic image, hearing an authentic sound, interacting with an authentic individual. But this jumble of fragments has no core. It is an imitation of reality, a mirage of the authentic life stolen from us. Apparently, the world cannot go on without it, because the regime cannot go on with autonomous organics. The hysteria can be likened to Israel's fabled Samson option, the threat to destroy European civilization with a massive nuclear strike should Israel ever face annihilation. Our regime thinks the same way. They will drop the content nuke, an auto-generating synthetic culture that chokes the organic and the spontaneous. Total fragmentation, noise without signal, the uncanny dead world of pure technique. But this maneuver will only set the stage for the dramatic return of pure instinct.